But the Senate, as it begins consideration of the comprehensive crime legislation, and as we do so, we should start with the question not of what has happened in the past 100 days the President keeps talking about, but rather what has the Bush administration done or failed to do over the past 100 weeks that he has been President to fight crime. Under the administration, this administration, America has seen its worst crime explosion in our entire history. Let me repeat that. In the last 100 weeks, the President likes to talk about 100 days. I want to talk a little bit about 100 weeks. In the last 100 weeks, under this administration, the United States has undergone the worst crime epidemic in its entire history. Under this administration, we've seen an all-time national record for murders. Over 23,000 people murdered in this country. 23,000, making us the most dangerous nation in the world. An all-time national record for rapes. A woman in Italy is over 40 times safer from the prospect of being raped than a woman in the United States. A woman in England is over 15 or 20 times in that range safer than a woman in the United States. A literal epidemic of rape in this country. We've also seen all-time national record for violent crime. And this is a product of 100 weeks of tough talk on crime and too little tough action on crime. The President blames this crime plague and in turn the need for a new crime bill on congressional inaction. And he's certainly entitled to make such political statements. Every president does. The Democratic president coined this capability. Harry Truman made it it was a fine president. But he found there was great benefit in running against the Congress. There always is. Were I in the President's position, I would find it great political fodder as well. But he is entitled to engage in such statements. But let's look at the facts. Since 1986, Congress has passed over 230 new or expanded penalties for drug and criminal offenses in this United States. 230 new penalties. And these penalties range from an automatic 5 years in jail for any person caught with a rock of crack cocaine, a piece of crack cocaine as small as a quarter. I don't have a quarter with me, but if you visualize what one looks like, yeah, I do have a quarter. If you have a piece of crack cocaine no bigger than this quarter that I'm holding in my hand, 1/4 of $1. We passed a law through the leadership of Senator Thurmond and myself and others, a law that says if you're caught with that, you go to jail for 5 years. You get no probation. You get nothing other than 5 years in jail. Judge doesn't have a choice. Now, the fact of the matter is, we've gone from there all the way up to saying, under the leadership of Senator Thurmond, and I'd like to suggest that I take some small credit for it myself as well, and others, the presiding officer, that there is now a death penalty. And we passed it a couple years ago. If you are a major drug dealer involved in the trafficking of drugs and murder results in your activities, you go to death. And a number of other severe penalties. We changed the law so that if you are arrested and you are a drug dealer, under our forfeiture statutes, you can, the government can, take everything you own, everything from your car to your house, your bank account, not merely what they confiscate in terms of the dollars from the transaction that you've just got caught engaging in. They can take everything. We have laws in the last several years where we don't allow judges discretion to sentence people. Flat time sentencing. You get caught, you go to jail. Well, all of these tools have been at the president's disposal for the last 100 weeks and more. Now, if America's crime problem is worse than it ever was, it's not because the Congress has failed to give the president the tools. It's done its part, but rather because the administration has failed to use the power given to it by the Congress over the last 5 years, and in particular the last 100 weeks, to bring this epidemic under control. Specifically, the administration's record of inaction includes some glaring examples. And the only reason I'm doing this is to try to, so we can cut through all this and try to get down to the facts. So when we start to vote on specific pieces of legislation, we get away from all the hyperbole and political posturing on this legislation. No wonder the press only covers this legislation in terms of the politics of it. You don't hardly ever hear a debate in the press about whether or not one habeas corpus bill is in fact better than the other. You hardly hear ever any discussion about whether or not one sentencing mode is better than another. You hardly ever hear any discussion in the press about whether or not the aid to local law enforcement along the lines I'm suggesting or the president is suggesting, which is better. Because the president, leading the band, and everyone else then here in the Congress, following the drummer, the chief majorette out there, drum major, what happens? We all talk about the politics of it instead of the substance. Well, the facts are glaring how bad things are. 200 days ago, Congress enacted a life in prison for major drug dealers. Yet in the past 3 years, the president has obtained this penalty for only on average 4 drug dealers in the entire country each year. If you live here in Washington, you pick up the paper daily. As a matter of fact, the papers are stopped doing it because people are tired of seeing it. Major drug dealers engaged in turf wars, people getting shot on street corners, murder rate phenomenally high. So we said 43 years ago, put those people in jail for life, no probation, no parole. And in certain circumstances, if they kill someone, put them to death. And guess what? Out of all those crimes you read about, out of all of the outrageous actions, this administration, on average, the last 3 years, has gotten on an average, 4 persons per year. 4, count them, 4 per year. Think about it. We have about 2 million people who have been using cocaine weekly in this country over the past half decade. But over the past 3 years, the administration has used its power to send drug dealers to jail for life only once every 3 months. The Congress is not tough on crime. 1,000 days ago, Mr. President, Congress gave the president the power to seek the death penalty against drug kingpins who murder. But in the past 1,000 days, this president, during the period of bloodshed and mayhem of which the president has spoken, the president has obtained the death penalty for only 1 person. 1. Congress is not tough. Congress passed a law and said, Mr. President, find these people when you get them, when the Justice Department has them, and they've murdered somebody, put them to death. That's what we said. You have the power. 1,000 days ago, that was given. 1 time has the vaulted Justice Department under the leadership of Mr. Thornburg, who beats up the Congress all the time, 1 time have they obtained a death penalty. Now look, maybe there's reasons why they can't. Maybe it's hard to make a case. Maybe there's a whole rationale for why. But I find it, quite frankly, preposterous that this president stands up and says this Congress is not tough on crime after we've given him all this power. And just to take two examples, he's only 4 times a year put someone in prison for life, and only once gotten the death penalty. 23,500 murders, 2,200,000 people cocaine addicts, 5.7 million felonies a year, 1 death penalty, 4 times a year life imprisonment. And the Congress is not tough on crime? Mr. President, this quarter, remember I told you before? We passed a law, bipartisan. We said crack cocaine is such a bad deal that if you find someone with this much of it, a quarter's worth, not in value, in size, 5 years in jail. Well, guess what? If the Justice Department in New York City, the U.S. Attorney, arrests you with that much, the police arrest you, and they take you to the Justice Department, and you only have that much, guess what the Justice Department, Mr. Thornburgh, says? We're not going to prosecute you. You have to have 10 times that much for us to prosecute you in New York City. Whose judgment is that? The Congress or the President? And guess what? If you're in Miami and you get picked up with this much cocaine, crack cocaine, they say, we're not going to put you in jail for 5 years. You say, well, we caught him with 10 times this much. They say, nah, we're still not going to do anything. We're not going to prosecute you. You have to have 100 times the minimum amount required. Congress said, put them in jail for 5 years if they have this much. The President said, and he has his own reasons for saying it, and they may be good ones, but he says, no, not unless you have 100 times this much. Are we going to even prosecute you? I ask you, Mr. President, who's not tough on crime? The Congress? The Constitution says we pass the laws. The President enforces the laws. We don't have a vigilante posse up here, Mr. President. We can't start holding court here. We can't prosecute people from here. We can't, in the Congress, say, arrest him or her or him, bring them into this chamber. We have a law that says you go to jail for 5 years, no probation, no parole. If you have this much, they had this much, the jury finds they have this much, lock them up and put them in our prison. We have 3 equal branches of the government. One branch, the presidency, is supposed to enforce the laws. Now, if you wonder why I'm so frustrated, Mr. President, I've been dealing with this issue, crime. I have been either the sponsor or co-sponsor of every major tough piece of legislation relating to dealing with the criminal element in this country in the last 10 years, as many others have. And I hear the President tell me I'm not tough on crime. And he gets a death penalty once? Is he trying to tell me there's only one person out there in the last 1,000 days that has met the statutory requirement of death as a consequence of being a drug kingpin? Is there only one drug kingpin who murdered somebody that got caught in the last 1,000 days? Is that what he's saying to me? Or is he saying to me that for whatever reasons they were not able to or chose not to use the laws at the disposal of them made available by this very tough Congress on crime? Mr. President,